All right. With your experience, like, why would you say that's kind of, that you do see that presentation?
Well, and I'd even extend on that to say you might see someone who has very good mobility of a joint in a relatively passive position, but then starts to have quite poor flexibility when you start to add more tension to the system. And
Yeah, let's nut that out because I think
yeah,
that's super interesting. What do you mean when you say tension?
yeah. So as the name suggests, creating tension within the system, which we can essentially do three ways: by lengthening a tissue. So we're talking about muscles, joint capsules, ligaments, other connective tissue structures; by contraction, because as we contract a muscle, we'll create more active stiffness and therefore limit the range of movement. And the other big one too is the rate of force development, or the speed of the movement. So this makes a lot of sense. Think about if you have someone lying down on a bed, moving their shoulder in through range of movement while they're being passive, you're going to be able to achieve a certain amount of movement. You get that person to do the exact same movement, where again you ask them to do the movement now, so we're looking at active range of movement, you may see a slight reduction in the amount of movement they have. Part of that has to do with, as they start to contract their tissue, their soft tissue, their muscle, they're creating tension around that joint, and potentially through the myofascial plane associated with that movement, that starts to compromise the amount of movement they have.
Okay. Yeah, so that was always something, like, I remember as a student, I never understood that. It's like, why is the active range different to the passive range? At a fundamental level, that never made any sense to me until, we started having more of these discussions, because you think, well, if I can move it through that range as the clinician, why can't they move it through that range as the individual?
And
there shouldn't be anything that's limiting that.
Well, this is where it's important to think about what's the biggest limiting factor to range of movement, and by far that is your stretch tolerance.
Yep.
So when I say stretch tolerance, it's literally your central nervous system's ability to essentially accept lengthening that tissue to a certain range. So, explain that a bit further, the reason why a gymnast can do the front splits versus perhaps yourself
there's no way I could do the front splits, that's for sure,
is not to do with the actual structure of your anatomy, like your bony morphology or your
because
system.
You hear of these discussions that if you were, say, anesthetized, I probably could do the front splits.
Absolutely.
Right? It would look like weekend at Bernie's, but
well, and even to take that a step further, you even see that in cases of people with severe pathology. So again, orthopedic surgeons will talk about someone that they're about to do a total hip joint replacement on, who, when they're conscious, has very compromised or restricted range of movement, yet starts to essentially have normal range of movement when they're under a general anesthetic.
Yeah, and so what that stretch tolerance you talk about, like, what is inhibiting that movement? Is it what are the messages that are going? What are the afferent feedback that it's getting to say I shouldn't go into that range?
Well, it's purely that, isn't it? So it's got to do with stretch receptors within your soft tissue network sending a signal to your central nervous system, and your central nervous system interpreting that as non-ideal, non-optimal.
Yep.
And that's just reflective of your prior experiences. It's similar to, say, resistance training, where one of the biggest adaptations you'll see acutely within resistance training is neural adaptations.
Yeah.
Your ability to create stronger, a stronger central command from your central nervous system.
Yeah, firing rates
to your muscle.
Less inhibition. Yeah, it's interesting because this kind of idea clearly explains why we see changes quickly in things like flexibility. Like
absolutely.
Right now, if I got on the ground and went to touch my toes in a hamstring stretch, initially it'd be pretty stiff. And if I hold this for 30 seconds, a minute, it seems like it gets easier. But clearly that tissue is not elongating, is it?
Well, no. I mean, you do see some changes in the viscoelastic properties of tissue that happen acutely. So they'll typically become less viscous and therefore more elastic. But that's quite transient.